So now we have another fascinating conversation that's going to take place live on this stage right now. I'm going to introduce the panel who are going to talk about skilled volunteering and the opportunity for the third sector. So we talked about skilled volunteering and the impact on the business and the volunteer. We're now going to talk about the impact on the third sector. So this conversation is going to be hosted by Nick Murray, who is recently taken over to head up the Barclays Eagle Labs, which is placed over there. It's a fascinating space, by the way, so pick his brains about that, because it is a brilliant location, a great initiative by Barclays. Joined on the stage by Elaine Crichton, from Inspiring Scotland, Jansev Jamal from Pro Bono Economics, and Joanna Allen from the Scottish Tech Army. So a big warm welcome to our panel.
Hello. Thank you so much for that lovely introduction. It's so good to be here with you all today. So we've got 30 minutes, so we're going to dive kind of right into it. I want to set the scene very slightly. So yes, I'm Nick Murray from Barclays Eagle Labs. Come and visit us in Glasgow's beautiful historic Beco building just around the corner. If you're into entrepreneurship and tech and support and community, we're trying to build a vibrant and inclusive hub just across the way there. So, skilled volunteering and the opportunity for the third sector. So volunteers are the lifeblood, the bedrock of the third sector, and it simply wouldn't function without them. Whether it's skilled volunteering or tech or any other kind of specialist sector, it's transformational for charities, but sometimes these organizations just don't know how best to take advantage of that. So, I'm delighted to be joined this afternoon by our panel. We have Elaine Crichton, Specialist Volunteer Network Executive at Inspiring Scotland. That is a community of change makers with a specialist volunteer network. They connect over 500 professional volunteers within Scotland's charities to build capacity and strengthen the sector. We've also got Jansev Jamal, Director of Policy and Research at Pro Bono Economics, or PBE. They are set up to provide pro bono economics analysis support to charities. They partner with economists who are happy to give up their time pro bono to support charities, often with impact analysis. And last but not least, we have Joanna Allen, Head of Projects and Programme at STA. STA is a community of skilled volunteers giving their time and digital expertise to support charities. Volunteers have worked as specialist advisors as well as on project teams, and they now have a community of over 2,500 tech professionals looking to support the third sector. So I couldn't have a better panel to dive into this big topic. So folks, let's get into it. How can third sector capitalise on opportunities that skilled volunteering offers, and maybe some examples of some of the impact that can happen when this works well? Would you like to kick us off, Elaine?
All right, I'll jump in straight away. So I think we all know what the subject matter is today, so I'm just going to jump in with a couple of examples. The first one I'll start with is tech, where we had a request in for someone to help with a marketing strategy. And then when we dug into it, we discovered actually that it wasn't actually a marketing strategy. What they were actually wanting to use was to use their database in a more clever fashion to connect with their subscribers and people who were interested in the services that they were offering, and to track it and to do all sorts of stuff with it. So we ended up connecting them with a tech volunteer who was very skilled in Salesforce. And 40 hours later, they've got some amazing ways of connecting with all of their subscribers and doing loads more. The project's not finished. That one's ongoing, really exciting. Another one, which is a little bit older and non-tech, was we had a board of directors who contacted us and said that they wanted to sort of check that the VAT was being correctly recorded within their organisation. A real good thing for a board of trustees to check up on, actually. So we've got one VAT expert in our network of volunteers. So she went in and had a little dig around. And yes, they were actually paying their VAT properly and had been doing so for the last 5 years. Too much. So she ended up getting them a £27,000 VAT rebate. And in this sector, that's a project worker for a year. So massively impactful.
That's beautiful. We actually use Salesforce in Eagle Labs, so if you hook me up with some of that, because I can't get my head around some of it. Jansev, have you got any other examples of best practice here for third sector orgs?
Yeah, sure, thank you. So I think this is huge. This topic area is hugely pertinent for pro bono economics because it's essentially what we were founded on. Was the just to tell you a little bit about that, we were founded in 2009. One of the co-founders was Andy Haldane, who at the time was chief economist at the Bank of England, and it was post-economic crash. And he looked at the situation and thought, banking industry not covered itself in glory here, and he wanted to give something back. So he set up an initiative whereby economists, so mostly economists working for the government, but we now sort of have economists working for all kinds of organisations, give up their time pro bono to support charities who otherwise couldn't necessarily afford that analytical support. And our economists work on a variety of projects, often sort of impact-based. I've got one example I thought I'd share with you today, a recent sort of real success story, if you like. The charity was Walking with the Wounded, which is a leading military charity supporting veterans. And they run two schemes, one covering employment and one covering mental health. The economic associate that we had working on it discovered through their analysis that the employment programme improved average score on life satisfaction by 4.3 points on a 10-point scale. And in terms of economic value, that translated into somewhere between £47,000 and £76,000 per person supported. Now, even if all of that benefit was not attributable to the scheme alone, it only needed, we discovered, between 2 and 4% of the impact of that programme to be attributable for the costs of the scheme to outweigh, for the benefits to outweigh the costs. And what we'd also discovered is that the beneficiaries of these schemes were amongst the 6%, had the 6% lowest well-being scores that you will find when you measure sort of levels of well-being. So not only was a group of people being supported who were really, in terms of well-being, amongst the lowest in our society, but these schemes were also demonstrated to have real sort of value in terms of the benefit of these people's lives. The figures for the mental health scheme were not quite as strong, but still they were still positive. From my perspective, that's a hugely valuable example of a lot of charities need to be able to demonstrate this kind of impact to get funding for their schemes. So that's why these kinds of analyses are so important and so critical. And one of the sad things I find is that we get a lot of charities coming to us who would like that kind of support and analysis, but they don't have the data for us to be able to demonstrate the impact. So often what our economists will do is advise them on the kinds of data that they can and should be collecting going forward, in the hope that maybe, say, in 12 months' time or sometime in the future, we can look at doing that analysis. So I think that was just one example I wanted to share of the potential for skilled volunteering in the third sector.
That's excellent. I mean, I've seen a lot of this. I'm a bit of a CSR loser. I'm going way back. I love the whole Robin Hood theory. And for me, during COVID, I'm going to drop the C word, seemed like all the opportunities, all the crazy things that were coming out, they were coming out from community organisations. They were coming out from normal people on the street. It wasn't coming from these huge corporates. And on the flip side, you had people that were furloughed and they were at home working, and maybe they realised throughout the chaos of that pandemic that the thing that they had put their life into, their 9 to 5, commuting, it probably potentially wasn't filling them with a sense of purpose. So we have things like the Scottish Tech Army that took these people and gave them something which was an opportunity for them to shift the needle and to have a purposeful thing. Maybe they're working in professional services or banking, and maybe it's not quite ticking their box in terms of purpose. My question for you, Joanna, if we can follow up on there, is what are the opportunities for the third sector to tap into that in a wider sense in terms of professional skilled volunteering?
Skilled volunteering's been around for a while. Probably obviously it started in the legal profession, doing the sort of pro bono work. And what's nice is people have seen that work, seen that success, and increasingly we're sort of seeing it in the tech sector. Historically, probably, companies have picked a charity and kind of said, right, what can we possibly do with them? But sort of concentrated on the community side rather than looking into, well, actually, we've got all these capabilities. Is there a way that we can magnify what we're doing, basically? So by organisations like, the Skilled Volunteering Network that Inspiring Scotland have, the STA, we're helping bridge a gap where if you don't know about something, it's very hard to ask for help. So where skilled volunteering can also touch that transformational point is that art of the possible. You know, if you're a small organization, it's very hard to keep up with everything. And technology, even, you know, if you look at all the reports coming with Mark Logan and that, the education sector is struggling to keep up with technology. If you're a team of 2 looking after a massive team of, you know, an autistic community or whatever it is, you don't have time to do everything and keep the lights on. So if you have that ability to have a trusted partner that can come in and take you on the journey, you can have phenomenal impact. And what's nice is, unlike paid work or a contract where you turn the tap on and the money's drifting, it can be at the cadence that you're ready for. So time is incredibly precious in the third sector. And sometimes giving somebody, here's the breadcrumb, go away and think about it, and then coming back to allow people to be ready for the change is a really important part. And you need that in businesses. That's not different for a tech project in a company. Everybody isn't all ready for the change when you start, so it's no different when you start working with charities in the third sector.
Indeed. So this is an increasing trend across business. How much skilled professional volunteering is currently taking place, and what would you folks say are some of the skill sets that are currently well served in the third sector, but also some of the gaps?
Shall I go? I think one of the unfortunate things is we just don't have the data. So it would be really wonderful if we sort of had essentially the data. There's no single sort of source that you can go to that has a view of all of the schemes that are currently running out there. I think increasingly we are starting to see more, which is a wonderful thing, but it's difficult to pinpoint. I think we're also seeing a diversity in the type of skilled volunteering that is taking place. So Joanna made reference to the legal. I think legal was one of the first, I think, to come along. So when Andy Haldane was looking at setting up PBE, he looked at whether anything like that was happening in the economic sphere and couldn't identify it and sort of open that up. You know, we ourselves have recently been the beneficiary. We've been the beneficiary of both HR pro bono support, but also more recently HR pro bono support as well. That opportunity, however, came by through a contact. So it wasn't like we as a charity, feeling like we needed some HR support, knew that we could go and speak to a particular organisation and reach out, even for advice, to say, who do we go to for this kind of thing? It was because somebody happened to know somebody who then said, yes, I'm willing to help out. So, yeah, it's difficult because, unfortunately, we just don't have the data for it.
Fair enough. Anyone want to jump in again on that in terms of what skill sets
I
are
would
missing?
just emphasise that point of it's all about relationships and who you know. So if anyone gets in touch with the Specialist Volunteer Network at Inspiring Scotland and contacts my colleague Tommy or myself, we can tell you about HR people or social media people, mentors and coaches. If you're looking for trusteeship, we can do all of that. But first of all, you've got to find us. It's really difficult. Even with how, you know, the world is connected in so many ways, it's really, really difficult to find even a tiny little kernel, which is, I think we are. We've got just over 500 specialist volunteers. We cover most of the skill sets, although we're a little bit short of HR at the moment. And then, and also we're reliant on the kindness of others. So we've had, you know, supporters that have come in and supported us for a number of years and then have left. And then with them, that's a big gap that we then have to, once they've gone, that's a big gap that we have to fill. So, yeah.
There is a real opportunity here. You hear people say, if you don't measure it, you don't value it. The challenge is, how do you get that measurement? You know, the environmental push had a similar thing. There wasn't the standards, there's not the benchmarks. People are measuring impact differently and things like that. So, you know, what is that consortium that pulls things together to say, right, this is how it's been doing? And also the signposting too. You know, here is where you can go and get HR help. Here's where a tech community. And, you know, we are all using things like social media to get the word out. You know, I love it. Every person that comes in is finding out about us now through word of mouth. Long may that continue. With exciting developments like the Tech for Good Alliance, you know, that should make us stratospheric in kind of impact and getting the word out, basically, because, you know, so far it's 2,500 volunteers of individuals. Imagine how much, you know, we've got, 3 or 4 partners now. You know, that's just going to get bigger and bigger and the reach wider. basically.
Yeah, and sorry, I'll just go back to another point that was made earlier. We're not competitive. So if Tommy and I can't, fulfil the request that's coming through our network, I will, and I've got it set up on Salesforce, signpost directly to STA or signpost to PBE or whomever it is. Ross isn't here, but I signpost quite a bit to the third sector lab as well. So we really do try our utmost to help and not be competitive. The requests are not ours. They're coming from the third sector. These charities need support, so we'll do our utmost to deliver that.
Could you talk us through a little bit about the access point and the engagement and then the matchmaking process and how that personal touch kind of helps to land the project for success?
I was once described as the Cilla Black of specialist volunteering at a third sector event, that's okay, I'll take that.
We can call you Graham now.
But it is matchmaking. I mean, Tommy and I spend an inordinate amount of time talking to our volunteers, really getting to know them, not just putting their skill set on our database, but also, their little things about them. So when we contact them for a request, we think it's probably going to resonate, not just with their skill set, but how they actually want to give back. And then equally, Tommy and I spend a huge amount of time talking to the charities. Again, that was something that was talked about earlier, translating. So the charities don't use the same language as the private sector or the corporate sector, so we spend a lot of time translating the requests, and that's why we've got 100% success rate where we're matching a request from an organisation to one of our volunteers. I would also count signposting as a bit of a success as well. So,
thank you. Let's talk about the long game in terms of engaging volunteers for sustained impact. How can third sector organisations manage the demands of those volunteers as they're coming in and then also continue to support them and encourage them to contribute after that initial engagement and interest?
I'll go on that one then. It's with anything with a project, what's wonderful about tech, I think, and everybody thinks of tech as coding or sort of fixing the PC. It's not. Any tech sits within a change process. People will always take you on a journey. That starting something where you bring it through, it needs time. But, I think this is where the kind of upfront work, we call it triage, talking to somebody, listening to somebody, you get a sense of whether they're ready for the change they're asking for. Or if you, immediately say, right, you're asking for this, and this, it's actually, in technology terms, we would call that a CRM system. You're going to spend a lot of time with them, getting them ready for it. There's nothing worse. A team of developers aren't going to sit there and do nothing for 4 weeks while somebody decides if they want a blue button or a red button. So, the timing of getting this stuff and the readiness, because change sits in a bit like coaching in an uncomfortable space. And if you push somebody too uncomfortable, they disappear. I'm sorry, the people I look after are more important than the website. They're going to just go. So it is a real art and a skill set that isn't one you hear people talking about, change makers in the kind of tech world, but they have it because, that definition of done and what it looks like when you're finished in a year's time, in a 2 years' time, is a really frequent, common conversation in technology projects. It isn't just, oh, look, there it is. And, once you introduce something, a process, a new product, it stays. And you want it to stay or be valuable for longer than just the sort of week it takes to do it.
Are there other opportunities to keep people engaged and have more of a legacy piece in terms of dangling carrots of other roles that people could take on after that initial engagement?
Well, this is feeding into my specialist sort of part of specialist volunteering at Inspiring Scotland. So I spend a lot of time on trusteeship, delivering training to boards. So plus 60 boards were received training, or I spoke to them last year. Do a lot of that because I think that's fundamental. If you have a well-trained, properly diverse board leading the charity, you're much more likely to be a much more resilient and sustainable organisation because you've got that good leadership at the top. So I spend a lot of time on that, and you've seen this as well, Joanna, that if you get a volunteer involved with a charity, then it's like a light bulb moment, and they kind of want more of this engagement or want to maintain that involvement. So hey presto, you find out your volunteer's actually on the board as well, which is great, and they're usually on the board for 3 years. So they're continuing to cause that change and make that change happen, which is fantastic, and we should have a lot more of that.
It's magic when you see it, actually.
Yeah.
If we think that there's this abundance of people looking to volunteer and get involved in third sector businesses, and there's this demand from them, how can third sector organisations set themselves up for success in terms of how to make best use of these people when they're most motivated, but in some ways also they're most vulnerable?
Sure. I'm happy to kick off. I mean, I think there needs to be a clarity from the organisation about what it is they need and are looking for. And then, both Elaine and Joanna have talked about the matching up process. That's key to the success. It is about matching up the right person with the right both organisation and role, because ultimately you have to take into account, in terms of the volunteer, what is it they want to be doing? Not is it what only, but how much time do they have to give? Because I think that also needs to be taken into account. I've been doing some wider research on volunteering, and one of the things that I've seen recently is that there's growing evidence to support the fact that volunteering has benefits for the volunteer. But there appears to be, though I think there needs to be more research to back this up, is an optimum amount of time that somebody is giving. And that time may vary depending upon the type of task, the type of organisation. So, for example, if you had somebody volunteering in the NHS during the pandemic, that kind of volunteering task may be rather more stressful than other volunteering opportunities. And therefore, sort of getting that balance right is critical. So I think matching the right person to the right role and organisation, but then also monitoring that relationship and making sure that it's staying positively on track.
I would be tempted to go a little bit more basic than that. Just encourage organisations to ask. The mantra, if you don't ask, you don't get. So there's over 25,000 charities in Scotland. It went up over COVID. It's still going up now. So just ask. And then we can take care of it after that. We can tell you if it's possible or signpost or whatever. And even within Inspiring Scotland, when it used to be that this service was only open to our funded organisations, they didn't all use it, and they still don't all use it. But one interesting stat that we have got is that if an organisation uses the Specialist Volunteer Network once, they will keep using it for different things. So it is just ask. And whatever the preconceptions are about asking and what the volunteer is going to be like, and there might be a scary suit that's going to be, telling you how you should be running your charity, or you're going to get the office junior instead of some really skilled volunteer. And the reality is so different. So it's just ask, get involved, and then it clearly works because we've got such a high repeat usage rate.
One thing I'd say is, trust what you know as a charity. Most charities are working with people. They are incredibly good at talking to people, relating to you. The number of stories I have from volunteers who've gone, they remembered that my mum was ill every time, or they remembered I'm a carer. And that's not triggered. We've not coached them on that. They're just very good at dealing with people. They offer services that are directly connected to their client. They're not sitting behind many things. A lot of the services are in person. So there's a real human aspect that the volunteers can learn from. And actually, I would flip it the other way to the volunteers and say, yes, you may have the skills, but that doesn't mean you're talking to somebody that has not got any skills. So you do sometimes, unfortunately, see that kind of I know better thing, which brilliantly very quickly gets put back in a box. But charities have a real expertise. It is a reciprocal relationship. If earlier I was talking to somebody about designing an office for autism or neurodiversity, there are charities that know heaps more than you will ever know, and probably more than the architect firm you might engage as well. So there is so many ways that you can give and take in the relationship. It isn't just a one-way stream.
You mentioned preconceptions there, Elaine. I'd like to zoom in a bit on that last point there. Do you feel there is this perception that volunteers' expertise even professional ones, is less professional than a paid role on someone's CV or their LinkedIn profile?
I think it is, and I think it'll take time for that to change. I think it was called traditional community volunteering earlier on, and there still is that perception, but it is changing, and it comes down to data as well, and getting case studies out, and the cost-benefit analysis, all sorts of different ways of showing that there is huge value in professional volunteering, and it's different from the volunteering model that most people probably think about.
Anything to build on that, Joseph?
Yeah, as Elaine said, I think it is shifting, and it would be really interesting if we did have the data, particularly over time, because I think there was a perception that volunteering as sort of the local community-based activities that you might tend to think of. I think the more professional volunteering, skilled volunteering that is taking place, it is starting to break down that sort of perception and that attitude. I think we've also seen in recent years growing pressure on organisations around sort of the ESG agenda, CSR, and I think that some of this volunteering, this idea of professional and skilled volunteering, is helping to be supported by those kinds of agendas, and I think more organisations are looking at the opportunities for skilled volunteering as a way of demonstrating their commitment to whether it's CSR or ESG.
And there's also, the other little pattern that we see is, and I don't want to be ageist, but the volunteers that we have who are maybe, I'll just randomly, over 30, they're wanting to give back. The volunteers that we have who are maybe under 30 are really wanting to get involved in making social change happen. So we have, different things that we can get our volunteers involved in so as they can get that, what they need. And it's very beneficial, as we know, yeah.
Anything to see us out on that point in terms of the changing perceptions, Joanna, in terms of social constructs and perception?
It's hard. I think a lot of volunteers don't turn up to an organisation under a sort of social construct that we're familiar with. It's very interesting if you turn up with titles that you hear in the press and stuff like that. Somebody's like, "Oh God, they're a CEO. That's great," sort of thing. It doesn't always translate when somebody turns up kind of out of work in their own clothes, going, "I'm Bob and I can do this." You have no point of reference to sort of put them in a box, basically. So, sometimes it does mean is stuff not realised. I'm sure if somebody sat down and told me a whole host of careers, I would have no real understanding of how they got there. So, if you don't know about something, it's very difficult to value the skill set. But I think, that's where sessions like awareness, the art of the possible and things like that, tech moves so quickly. The AI stuff, incredibly topical, scary, ethical, huge dilemmas at the minute. I'm sure when something gets really scary, also the human nature is to go, "Oh, I'm just going to sweep that under the carpet," So there'll be very different social dynamics that come with that. So far, everybody we dealt with has just sighed, gone, "Oh my God, thanks for the help. We didn't know where to go." So, just that relief of having a service, a group you can access and say, "Here's my problem. I don't know whether it's a painting problem, a financial problem, an HR one, or a tech one," is just, how do I start the journey of understanding what this is? So, I'm sure there is. I'm very lucky I've not bumped into lots of it.
Folks, that's all we've got time for, but just very quickly before we wrap up, I want to put you on the spot for a 10-second answer, asking you, what are you all individually most excited for right now in the space of skilled volunteering? Jan, you look like you're ready to go, so very quickly wrap us up.
What am I most excited about? I guess, I don't know if this is a cop-out answer, just the potential for it. And I think when we've heard about some fantastic individual examples, case studies, and if you scale that up across all of the organisations involved today, I just think the potential for it is just so exciting. So I'm going to go with that.
Lovely. Elaine?
I've got two, so 5 seconds. I would want people to use the Specialist Volunteer Network more. We've got more volunteers than we have requests. And then the second one is my personal mission, and it's all to do with trustees. and educating trustees and changing the stats. The over 60 called John. That's a real stat.
Can you see us out, Joanne?
I would have to echo potential. I think we're already seeing momentum growing. You can see when we get the sort of corporate teams working, it's quicker, it has an impact. The confidence grows at the charity, the confidence grows with the staff. It is a real super, we call all our volunteers have a superpower. I do think it gives you a superpower. It's a great way of really reaching beyond what your world is.
Beautiful stuff. Well, folks, that is all we've got time for. Thank you so much for your ears, people in the room, everyone watching at home. Let's give it up for a fantastic panel. We've got Jansiv, Elaine, and Joanna. Thanks so much.